So of course, when we are talking about actions, we are talking about our behavior and the consequences of our actions. So this is just the first slide. And for today, we are talking about consequentialism. So it is the view that morality is all about producing the right kinds of overall consequences. When we are talking about overall consequences, it means that everything that comes about, including the action itself. It means everything that comes about, including the action itself. So for example, if you think that the whole point of morality is to spread happiness and relieve suffering to create as much freedom as possible in the world or to promote the survival of our species, you accept consequentialism. It is also the view that one morally ought to promote just good outcomes. So of course, when we are talking about just good outcomes, we are talking about positive things only. Even though it is controversial, since it's going against common sense. Now let's talk about theological ethics. So it is an approach to ethics that argues that the morality of an action is contingent on the outcome or consequence. Thus, a morally right action is one that produces a good outcome or result, and the consequences of an action or rule generally outweigh all other considerations. Thus, a morally right action is one that produces only a good outcome or result, and the consequences of an action or rule generally outweigh all other considerations. The theory of morality that derives duty or moral obligation from what is good or desirable as an end to be achieved. It is also known as a consequentialist ethics. It is opposed to deontological ethics, which means deon means duty in Greek, which holds that the basic standards for an action's being morally right are independent of the good or evil generated. Okay. So for theological ethics, the right action should always just be what is the best. So that's the simplest explanation of theological ethics. So the right answer for theological ethics, for example, between two jobs, if you're going to choose between two jobs, like do you want to become a lawyer or just a simple person, like a seller somewhere? So of course, with theological ethics, you are going to choose to become a lawyer since it is the best outcome. Okay. Meanwhile, of course, utilitarianism. So this is also a part of consequentialism. This is a theory of morality that advocates actions that foster happiness or pleasure and oppose actions that cause unhappiness or harm. So, for utilitarianism, the negative consequence is what makes you unhappy, and the positive outcome is what makes you happy. Once again, utilitarianism, what makes you unhappy is negative, and what makes you happy is positive. So, this is also a form of consequentialism once again. And once again, it is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing only on outcomes. Now let's talk about the difference between utilitarianism and consequentialism. So although utilitarianism and consequentialism are used interchangeably, there is a difference between the two theories. Utilitarianists are more concerned with the greatest good for the greatest number. Meanwhile, consequentialists are more concerned with the greatest good than with the good of greatest number. So, one example of utilitarianism is it right to let one patient die in order to harvest his organs and perhaps save 5 lives? So, another example, is it good to just kill one person, for example, a kidnapper, but you don't know who is the kidnapper in that place? Would you choose to kill that person to just save all those other people, even though you're not sure it was he was really the kidnapper? So that's an example of utilitarianism as well. Or maybe if you are uh, uh, the person who saves lives in a fire, would you choose just 5 people to save and forget about one person who's trapped inside another room? So that's also utilitarianism. Okay, now let's talk about simple versions of consequentialism. Okay. So plain consequentialism, it is assumed as the most standard precise version of consequentialism. So it does mean of all the things a person might do at any given moment, the morally right action is the one with the best overall consequences. If there is no one best action, because several actions are tied for best consequences, then of course, any of those several actions would be right. So it also uh, means that the more happiness, the better. And we view the right action as the one that causes the most happiness. The consequence of an action is the action itself and everything the action causes. So that's plain consequentialism. Conceptualism is also tied to plain consequentialism. So with conceptualism, it is a theory about the moral quality of actions that can be morally right or wrong, or intentional actions or things we do deliberately. So once again, with plain consequentialism, it is all about the more happiness, the better, and that's the right answer for plain consequentialism. So for example, uh, you're going to choose between 2 ice cream cones. Of course, the one thing that makes you happier is the one that you would choose. Or maybe, let's talk about relationships. If you're happier with the other person, you would choose that other person, even though uh, it is wrong to choose that person. Now let's talk about plain scalar consequentialism. Of any 2 things a person might do at any given moment, one is better than another to the extent that its overall consequences are better than the other's overall consequences. And the best consequences are morally best, but it does not say that if you do the second best, you are doing something morally wrong. It says nothing about right or wrong. And let's talk about expectable consequentialism. The morally right action is the action whose reasonably expectable consequences are best. It says that an action can be right even if you do not think reasonably about it at all, so long as it is the action I would have estimated to have the best consequences if I had done a reasonable job of making an estimate. Meanwhile, reasonable consequentialism, it is an action which is morally right if and only if it has the best reasonably expected consequences. For an action to be right, I must actually come to a reasonable conclusion beforehand about the consequences. Then dual consequentialism, the word right is ambiguous. It has a moral sense and an objective sense. First, the objectively right action is the action with the best consequences. And second, the morally right action is any action with the best reasonably expected consequences. And then rule consequentialism, it is an action which is morally right if and only if it does not violate the set of rules of behavior whose general acceptance in the community would have the best consequences. That is at least as good as any rival set of rules or no rules at all. So those are the simple versions of consequentialism. Now let's talk about two arguments for consequentialism. First is only results remain. Well, for only results remain, the results matter only. Even so, pleasures pass by as quickly as actions. So, in that case, since pleasures only pass by as quickly as actions, it does mean that happiness is something short. Then, with love, of course, it is also an argument for consequentialism. And let's talk about arguments against consequentialism. First is partiality. Of course, we are talking about egoistic consequentialism here. So it does mean of all things a person might do at any given moment, the morally right action is the one that has the best consequences for that person. Then friendly consequentialism. So it does mean of all things a person might do at any given moment, the morally right action is the one that has the best consequences for that person and her friends. Then letter, and then equality. It is also an argument against consequentialism, since we are talking about our equality to others. And fourth is personal rights. With personal rights, we are talking about our own human rights here. And of course, it goes against common sense. Huh? Let's talk about double consequentialism. With human thinking, of course, that's the fifth argument against consequentialism. So, the word right is ambiguous. It has a moral sense and an objective sense. The objectively right action is the action with the best consequences, and the morally right action is any action one reasonably estimates to be objectively right. So those are arguments against consequentialism. Once again, the 5 arguments against consequentialism are partiality, friendly consequentialism, equality, personal rights, and human thinking. Now let's talk about further arguments for consequentialism. First is reasons for action. Second, it is wrong to choose the worse over the better. It also talks about the ideal spectator. It is also talking about what is desirable and common sense. Now let's talk about non-consequentialist views. First is the ontology. So it is an ethical theory that uses rules to distinguish right from wrong. The ontology is often associated with philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant believed that ethical actions follow universal moral laws such as don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat. So the ontology is simple to apply. It just requires that people follow the rules and do their duty. So this approach tends to fit well with our natural intuition about what is or isn't ethical. So one example for this, some people agree with death penalty. Those who don't agree with death penalty are more on non-consequentialist views. Meanwhile, those who agree with death penalty are utilitarianists or consequentialists as well. So for them, a killer should be killed immediately to save a lot more people. Even so, there are people who are saying that they should not be killed. Those who are prisoners and who do something worse to human beings. Or maybe with utilitarianism and consequentialism, once again, it is an example wherein you should kill one person or maybe to save a lot more people. So that's utilitarianism and consequentialism. And lastly, we are talking about virtue ethics. So it focuses on the character of the agent rather than on either the nature or consequences of the action itself. So once again, with virtue ethics, it focuses on the character. So when we are talking about the character, it's all about the person itself rather than his or her action. So that's virtue ethics. So that's all for today. Do you have any more questions about today's class?
Ma'am,
Okay. Hello, I can hear you.
pwede pong pakiulit po sa may unang slide po. Di ko po kasi nailagay sa notes po eh.
Okay.
Yung sa may po, consequential, kakabulol.
Consequentialism.
Consequentialism.
Okay.
Opo.
Say it with me. Consequentialism.
Consequentialism.
Okay. Ito ba?
Opo. Thank you po.